Welcome to Beyond the Backlog, where we look at thrilling tales of gaming triumphs, both past and present, exploring the strategies, challenges, and unforgettable moments that shape the ever-evolving landscape of our digital adventures. I'm Nick.
And I'm Zack.
And we got another list coming back to you guys
Surprise,
today.
surprise.
Right? They're easy to do. We got a lot of opinions. We'll get to it. One...
We're just a two-person team. What can we really make with just two people?
Well, apparently some great games. So we've got... indie games we're talking about today. Top 5 plus a couple honorable mentions. I'm going to keep 5, keep it short and sweet. But what were a couple ones that just went outside your list there?
Well, I mean, I know you just played Inside last month, and it got me thinking about how great of a game that is. And I really wanted to include it because I do think it is like a solid 9 out of 10 any day, but I couldn't bring myself to put it above some of the ones ahead of it. Another one that we played recently was Cuphead, and just thinking about the fact that that is like an independent studio and just how much time and effort it took to just go frame by frame making these animations.
Yeah, the game's crazy.
And another one that in a perfect world, top 5 would have actually meant 6. The Witness would have been on mine because I love a good puzzle game, and I think the way that they use the environment itself as a way to present the puzzles is so cool.
And it's a good puzzle game.
Oh yeah,
it does a really good job of building up your puzzles. You start simple and you go, okay, I kind of get this.
And it's meaty compared to some other puzzle games where it's something like Inside, you could argue has a puzzle element to it, but it's...
Yeah, you beat that in a sitting.
Mm-hmm. Whereas the Witness, you can, if you want to 100% that, you're delving in for 20, 30 hours.
Yeah, 100%. I've got a couple. One of them is the OG Minecraft. It's good. Very good. If it was a objective list, it would be on there. But I personally am not the biggest fan of it. I've never been a big survival game guy, which is really funny when we see one of the games on the list.
Yeah, same. I was literally going to say the same thing. I can't do Minecraft. I'm not good at it. But
yeah. But if it hits a different way, we're great. Then the other one I saw popping up on a couple lists when I was just doing a little bit of research was A Plague's Tale: Innocence. I considered it more as a AA game, just bigger team, more of a B studio rather than small team, individuals, that kind of thing. If it was considered an indie in my mind, I probably would have had it 5th. It's a great game if you have never played it. You basically avoid a bunch of rats. You have to do different puzzles and explorations on that. Really good story game. Second game's supposed to be quite good as well.
Is that Requiem?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard both those are really good. And I think when I'm thinking AA, I'm thinking Hellblade is usually considered the archetype of AA, and I think Plague's Tale kind of hits that same quality.
Yep. Oh, exactly. Yeah, graphics were really good. The story is a decent length. I think probably about 12 hours, 13 hours maybe. But that's a couple of them if you want to try them out. More than welcome to, but we'll get into our top 5s each. What do you got to start?
All right. Well, for me, my number 5, and you're going to see in general, for me, what I like about an indie is when they take a direction or an art style that isn't really a safe bet for AAA developers anymore, or kind of bring back a retro aesthetic.
Yeah.
And it's because it kind of shows it's a product of passion rather than just what the industry wants. And for me, that first one is Shovel Knight. So this was released by Yacht Club Games back in 2014. It wasn't their first ever project, but it was the first one that really gained traction.
Yeah.
So that base game there, you're playing a classic 8-bit retro platformer. You start out with no special abilities like you would in Mega Man, and by defeating 8, a very conveniently Mega Man-ish number of bosses throughout the stages, you acquire those some new abilities that kind of help you through. And each stage is kind of centered around a certain mechanic that it wants to highlight, and they're very unique, very well presented, and they kind of fully flesh out each of those mechanics.
I put it, because I beat the game for the first time last year, I said it's something akin to if I was a kid growing up with a Nintendo, or even like a teenager, young adult, and playing some of those games for the first time, that's the kind of feeling that it evokes.
Mm-hmm.
Just like that fun, simple, clean gameplay with a lot of depth to it.
Mm-hmm. And you can tell the influences there, like the fact that the Order of No Quarter is 8 bosses, as I said, feels very Mega Man.
Yeah.
Being able to bounce on your shovel, if you ever played DuckTales on the NES, it's literally like straight out of that. And even just like the Mario 3 styled overworld.
Yeah.
So you can tell they love their retro NES games. And one other really unique system in there is the checkpoint system, where you can either break it for extra treasure or like keep it as a checkpoint so that if you think you're going to die sometime soon, you like don't have as far to travel. Because if you die, you leave bags of money behind and say it's over a big pit, you're probably screwed and you can't pick up your money again. And so some of your upgrades might be harder to get to. And they've even released a couple of DLCs, some amiibo, like actual Nintendo amiibo from it, which originally allowed you to play multiplayer.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's a perfect length, and like the graphic style is just like what I think of when I think indie. And it's kind of like the standard of excellence that most indies since 2014 have followed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's one of the ones that I see that tier 2 after like the Xbox Live Arcade kind of games.
Mm-hmm.
It was the first one to me that really shot up, did really well, and was like, oh no, this like indie stuff is really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like it was really when people started paying attention to like eShop exclusives for Nintendo.
Yes. Now, my number 5, it is in contention as my favorite Metroidvania kind of game. That's going to be Ori and the Blind Forest, the first game in the series. Second game, great, but I felt it a little bit better just to augment and showcase the first game. 2015, Metroidvania platformer. It's by Moon Studios. They've done these two, and then they're working on one now that's completely different from all the other ones that they've made, the 2 Ori games. Can't remember it off the top of my head, though.
Does it have like visual similarities?
I don't even think so. It's completely different gameplay style as well, yeah.
Game? Cool.
But as someone, I didn't really grow up getting really into Metroid games or Castlevania games. We had the OG on Nintendo, and I had Zero Mission on Game Boy Advance, but I wouldn't say I loved them. But I love this one. But I think it's just good for replay value, right? It gives you a good reason to replay different sections because you have different abilities and different ways to go through it, and now it doesn't feel as tedious doing constant backtracking that it does in some other games.
Like, you mean like in a new game plus sort of way? Or
no, even just like going through, like you get the double jump. Now you can go back to an area that you did before, but now you can reach new areas. Okay. Something like that feels more fresh to me, and it's the same thing with like Hollow Knight and things like that. Like that's what I find refreshing about the genre as a whole. But this game is one of the ones that makes you just go, wow. Right? Graphically, especially for 2015 standards, amazing. It's one of the most fluid games I've ever played. It's one that I considered, we've had talks about speedrunning in the past. That's one of the ones I considered to play just because it's crisp and fun to go through the game.
I own both of them, but I've never given them a try. But back in the day, was it exclusive to Xbox?
It was exclusive to Xbox and PC, I believe.
And that game single-handedly almost made me get like an Xbox One because I just like wanted to play it. But now I have it on PC, so
yeah,
I'll definitely get to it on the day soon.
Yeah, I would recommend it. There's cool little like randomizers as well for that. They kind of shuffle up where things are. There's a lot of meat on those bones, really. Music's phenomenal, really good ambience, really good story. I'm a sucker for anything that has a little bit more like foresty environment kind of thing.
Oh, absolutely. As we might discover here from my next game, number 4, Firewatch, which literally just takes place in a forest. So that was done by Campo Santo is the studio, and that was 2016. In it, you play as man Henry, and he's kind of taking a quiet summer away to work as a new fire lookout in Wyoming, following pretty much like this turbulent disintegration of his personal life. And honestly, it's a pretty fairly believable setup for a game. Like if it's a game that's just about working a job for the summer, it sets it up pretty well. And throughout it, you're only communicating with essentially your supervisor at the next tower over, Delilah, and you follow her instructions and she kind of tells you where to go and what to do. And honestly, what blew me away the first time I played this was they were just some of the most believable characters I may have ever seen in a video game, and especially the first time through. Like, I think I played through the game like 3 times. And when you play through it a second or third time, you realize like what is just like scripted dialogue versus what you can kind of manipulate by choosing different dialogue options.
Yeah.
But either way, it tells a very compelling, a very tense narrative that delves hard into like this mystery where it's like you're being spied on and you're trying to uncover who's behind this big like mission to like foil you. And honestly, without spoiling anything, the finale of the game just messed me right up. Like I was shook. And part of what they do is they make it so human.
Yeah.
And you're expecting some crazy wild thing to be going on, but it's very toned down, and it almost kind of mocks the story that you just experienced. It's kind of like, oh, you thought we were building up to something and pull the rug out from underneath you. And that made it stick with me for like 8 years later. I still think about it anytime I'm thinking of like a succinct, like 2-3 hour story that is just worth experiencing multiple times.
It's one I kind of forgot was more like a walking sim.
Yeah.
Right? Playing through it, you get a little bit more like, it tenses you. It makes you feel like it does one of the best jobs I've played for a walking sim of like, oh, I'm not just like wandering around.
And I wanted to include a walking simulator, and I kind of listed them out. And this had to be my number one because like the background that I bought for the PS4 when it came out remained my PS4's background aesthetic for like 7 years afterwards because I just loved the way it looked and the sound of it.
Absolutely. Now I've got number 4 here myself. This is my survival game. I kind of did the same thing that you did. I did different genres. I was like, what's like the best ones for it? I picked this War of Mine. It's a war survival video game. It's by 11-Bit Studios. They've kind of gotten big now. They did like Frostpunk, which is a big city builder survival game where you're constantly trying to like get materials, last as long as you can, all that. But first they did this, and they did Project Anomaly Zone.
But all of these I only know by name. I don't think I've ever actually played any of them.
The first one was like a mobile game where you were the side of the invaders. I don't know. It was something really cool with it. I did a short little video on it. But this one is set during a big wartime siege. The big one that I was
shocked.
Yeah, right. I was seeing like the siege of Sarajevo back with like Bosnia, but it's more likely just a whole bunch of them all smacked together. But the interesting part of it is it deals with the civilian experience rather than the soldier on the front lines.
And that seems like something that is part of that indie sort of experiences.
Yeah, the indie really likes to turn on its head a bunch of tropes and a bunch of like, oh, the masses will really like this. They want to be the big guy.
Yeah, especially after an era where it was just like soldiers with big guns, explosions, you're the hero.
Exactly. Whereas this one, you are either doing like a random setup of people, or there's a whole bunch of different little mini campaigns you can do where you're given the people beforehand that all have skills related to what their prior occupation was before the war. And you go through, you play a survival game. I'm really not a survival player, like I said, but this one just works because of more of the emotion attached to it. Because most of the survival games is just kind of get things, survive long. There isn't really much depth beyond that, so it doesn't really keep me going.
It's almost like you have to learn the mechanics through failure sometimes.
Exactly. Whereas this one, you still have that, but you also have, the game ends. There are endpoints to the game. Like there's a little radio you can turn on every day and kind of learn maybe how the war is going, how the weather's going to be, things like that. And it kind of helps you better prepare.
Okay.
Because there's always a point where you go to like a winter season where it gets colder. Now you've got to figure out how to melt the water, get things together, do all that. It's an interesting one too, because you do a lot of your exploration during the night, right? Because that's when less people actively looking out for things. So during the day, you gather your materials in the shelter, you build your walls up, you build your furniture to make it feel more comfort-based, less war times, because you've got to care about your occupants' mental state as well. And then during night, you divvy up jobs. You either have some people go to sleep, some people stand watch at your shelter, and then you have melee weapons or guns or anything like that. And then you have someone that can go out and scavenge. Then the scavenging, there's a whole bunch of different areas. There's a whole bunch of versions of those areas too, depending on like when in the game they unlocked for you.
Okay.
And that's where you kind of have, oh man, like war sucks. Shockingly, I know. But one that always sticks out to me is one of the first places that you can get into is a home with an elderly couple. And it's not the point of the game. They're not, like, they don't attack you, anything like that. They're more pleading.
Is the world the same for everyone, or is there some element of like random generation?
So each location is different. They can be unlocked at different times. It's a static amount of locations. But there's, I think, 2 different versions depending on when you get them. Mm-hmm. And like story beats from there. And then as the war ramps up, military occupation happens in more areas and they become unavailable to you for a certain amount of time. And then during winter, same kind of thing. You lose out on access to certain areas. But one of the first areas you can get to is an elderly couple that just want to be left alone. And you can, right? You can like scavenge around outside. You can get some materials there. But you can also go up into their bathroom and pick the lock and do all that and take all their medicine. Medicine's super valuable. If people get hurt, they need bandaged up, they need painkillers. And then when you do, and you go back, they're just dead. They're like on the ground there. You've done all this.
I was going to ask if there's like direct repercussions.
There's direct repercussions to it. And like, it doesn't give you that sense that you can go in guns blazing. Because you can arm yourself with a knife, you can arm yourself with a gun. And if you're killing like maybe a military person, it doesn't affect you as much. But if you need to get out alive and you have to kill a civilian, that destroys your person that you're playing as. So then they become like mentally broken, and then you have to like figure out if you can just get away with it, right? You have people comfort them during the day, things like that. And then if it doesn't work, they just leave or they just kill themselves. Like that's and then it affects everyone. And then that's where it kind of snowballs.
No, as you said, definitely a heavy focus on that.
It's a heavy focus on like war is bad. Mm-hmm. Shockingly. But it's one, I try to play it every couple years. I got it day one when it came out. I was like, this seems really cool. But, a couple DLC in that too. Great game if you get a chance. All their games are really good, really.
Awesome. How long of a game is it, though?
It can be pretty long. I think you're looking maybe about 15 hours per playthrough.
Oh, all right.
So it's when you just go in, maybe you beat a playthrough, and then you're like, okay, cool. Do something else.
All right. Shift gears a little bit.
Let's go happy.
Happiness. Good times. Indies. So my number 3 is Abzu. And so if anyone has played Journey, you'll know, it's the same art director as the originally did Journey. And that game is just a beautiful, like, walking simulator type game. But what really drew me in about Abzu was it is there's no combat. It's just a environmentally told story, but it's all done underwater. And when I played Journey, if you had told me there was going to be a game just like that, but set underwater, I would have literally been frothing at the mouth. But Giant Squid brought it to us in 2016. And honestly, the art style is very reminiscent of something like Firewatch as well, where it is that kind of like cartoony, I don't want to say cell shaded, but like that same sort of like character model. And it kind of just like lets you live this fantasy of freely diving through these stunning, colorful environments. And it even gives you the opportunity to just stop and meditate and just look at the environment around you and just kind of appreciate how like wondrous this is. Honestly, in that way, there's kind of some similarities to Endless Ocean as well. But instead of a focus on like, here's a story that's told in from like a very real, like we're trying to hunt down some mystical, legendary sea creature. It's more about these epic set pieces where you're like rushing through with a series of like orcas down a tunnel and then breaching the water at the end with them. And I genuinely got like goosebumps so many times playing this game. And I guess comparing it to Journey is pretty apt because you can tell a lot of the same people worked on it. The basic gameplay loop is very similar where you get this kind of big open environment. You have to interact with maybe 3 or 4 things to essentially open up the way to the next environment where you just kind of rinse and repeat. But I think this game in particular, to me, stands out as a perfect example of video games as art.
Okay.
Like, I legitimately like shed a tear.
And I know that moniker's given a lot to Journey as well.
Like, Journey probably was one of the first times that it was like universally agreed, like, we need to start this discussion as like video games are not just for kids or for like gamers. Like, they can be seen as emotional, provocative pieces of art.
Yeah. Just because it's new.
And in terms of the actual like story, like it's kind of exploring a bit of a mystery, but a little differently than how it does in Firewatch.
Yeah.
Like, that plays with your fear of being alone in the woods, whereas Abzu kind of plays on the fact that, you know, you see a giant shark in deep open water, you don't really want to approach.
What one's that? Like thalassophobia, I think?
Yeah, I think that's the fear of...
I think that's fear of open water.
Oh, open water? Yeah. But as you get closer to the end, you kind of see these hints of like some ancient civilization, again, like you do as you're experiencing the story of Journey. And there's a lot of like weird mechanical things towards the end that kind of hint at some old civilization there. And the overarching story is a narrative about like pollution and saving the environment. But I won't get too far into that. Just if you got the chance and you have any sort of desire to just explore beautiful open ocean environments, you got to give this one a go.
Perfect. All right, number 3. This one's going to be one I won't talk too much about because it's a game that's best experienced, kind of, you know, going in blind. And that's going to be the adventure puzzle game Return of the Obra Dinn by Lucas Pope. He's the guy that did Your Papers, Please is one of the big ones. This one did real well. It's this like almost like monochromatic styling,
but it's also like pixelated.
Yeah, it's very much inspired by like your early Mac computers, right? And that's where you kind of get your basis in, or a little bit like the old Atari games, just much more fleshed out, much more emotion based off of it. But the gist of it, you're an investigator for the East India Trading Company, and the Obra Dinn has just kind of washed up outside of England. It's been missing for 5 years, and there's no survivors on the boat. So you're tasked with going out there and figuring out what happened to everyone. You do this with this little pocket watch called the Memento Mortem, and it lets you find a pile of bones, part of the body, and see how they died. So it plays like a little audio clip of 15 to 30 seconds of before it dies, and then you're given a snapshot of how the person died. And you're supposed to figure out for each of the 60 crew members on the ship, what happened to them, if they were murdered, who killed them, by what, all this kind of stuff. So you go around, you explore each portion of it, and during that freeze frame, you can walk around the scene. So you're supposed to go in, see a whole bunch of things, because it's not just who died that's important, it's what the lead up to it is as well, because you might be able to see, oh, this person died here, but like this person's about to die on like the other side of the ship, so let's keep an eye on that, because, you know, those guys are getting all rough and tumble. And that's really the gist of it. It's like a 6-hour game, maybe. I think the first time I played it.
Like, is it being presented as a mystery, though, of like what happened to them?
It's presented as a mystery of what happened to them. So each time someone dies, you're given a logbook that kind of fills itself in with a bunch of menial information. It's going to be who died, who did this, how. And it gives a super pixely version of the person, as given by, like, there's a couple pictures that show all of the crew members or travelers on the ship, because there's a couple civilians as well. And as you correctly guess, every 3, it puts like paper to pen, or pencil to pen rather. And you're like, okay, well, these 3 were correct. Mm-hmm. So now these are written in stone. This is what happened to them. And then you do this, 20 times? Yeah, 20 times 360. And then that's it. And then you go through, there's a whole story attached with it as well. But it's kind of done in a roundabout way. You don't just start at the first person that died and go to the last. I think you actually start with like the last person or one of the last people to die. And then you go from there. And then as you go through it, like magically opens up other areas of the ship because they were open in that last death flashback.
Okay.
And then you kind of go around, you do all that. And it's a good time. It's one of my favorite mystery games, because otherwise, like, the Sherlock Holmes games are just kind of either a little obtuse or I don't know why this made sense.
Mm-hmm. But, and you saying that you don't want to delve too far into like the narrative of it or anything, it makes me kind of wonder, like, ooh, what is the mystery at the bottom of this? Like, is it a whodunit? Is it is it paranormal? Is there a monster?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and there are multiple things that you can put in to be quote unquote correct with this as well.
Okay.
There are right answers, but there's also right enough answers.
Cool.
Right? Because you're just the East India Trading Company. You don't really care.
Mm.
You're just trying to figure out if you need to give money to their families. Right? Because everyone's dead. It doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm. Okay. See, that's one where I've seen it before. I'm like, that looks really cool. I just didn't really understand what type of game it was.
Yeah.
So that really clarifies it for me.
Yeah. No, it's a good one. It's one I've probably played it to completion 3 times. I did it once on my own. I did it with a group of friends. We spent a night going through it, and then I would kind of give them tips if they were taking too long to, like, really struggling with some of them. And then the 3rd time I just redid it, because I think I had a video idea at one point I wanted to do, and it just didn't quite come to fruition, but I'll take playing this game over again.
I know I've said this about like 20 different games that you've talked about this year, but I'm absolutely going to play this one.
Yeah, no, it's great. It is fantastic.
All right, getting into my number 2.
Number 2.
Yeah. So I was just talking about Abzu, and that is a game that takes place entirely underwater. And I love it because it takes place entirely underwater. But it's not my favorite game that takes place entirely underwater. Actually, it's probably not even my second favorite one. But anyway, my favorite indie that takes place underwater is Subnautica. And this is also kind of my representative of the survival genre. Mm-hmm. If I could have made any video game, if you were to just give me a studio, make me the director of a game, my top 2 are probably what would have resulted. And the reason Subnautica is here is because it's a survival game that leans heavily into the liminal terror of just deep, murky waters. And they fill it with giant hostile creatures. So that's something that you don't get in Abzu, is any sense of danger. It's more of as I said, emotional experience with little subtle story tidbits trailed throughout.
I will say that's kind of what my thoughts of what Subnautica was as well, because I started playing it, didn't know too much about it years ago, and I just felt like, oh, it's just a survival game that's underwater, and I dropped it.
Oh, and I think it is one of those where if you just kind of stay in the starting area and are just kind of collecting some resources, working towards building a few base parts and your first main like travel pieces, like the sea moth, where you can just kind of glide, or no, the sea glide. The sea moth is your first like actual like capsule device that can take you deeper, and you're slowly unlocking upgrades that way. But if there was any game I wish I could experience for the first time again, it would be Subnautica, because getting to experience those varied biomes all over the map and having that steady progression system where you kind of just don't know what's coming up next. You don't know where you need to go to get those resources.
Yeah.
And the story is just kind of gradually pushing you deeper and deeper, further away from your base. Like, I really wish I could just have that experience for the first time again, because now I know everything that there is to know. And I can't unlearn that, but thankfully, what they do include is a variety of options on how you can play it. So if you don't want to have to worry about your oxygen levels, how hungry you are, how thirsty you are, your health, your temperature levels, you can just like hop into a creative mode. And people have created all these mods that can allow people to like adjust how much is required for certain recipes, or like how many things you need to scan to even unlock recipes. So they can make it harder, they can make it easier, they can randomize spawn points, or like the locations where you need to go for certain resources. I think that's really cool. The only downside is it's a huge, like 5 kilometer by 5 kilometer map, or maybe I think so. And so it can be hard to remember the exact spot of one little cave that you were in.
Yeah.
So if you run out of space and you're collecting a bunch of like rare metals, like your cobalts and like silvers and stuff, and you need to return there, there's no like quick way to do that. Like you're just going for a 10-minute ride back to your base, dropping your stuff off, hoping that your marker is enough to kind of remind you of where you needed to go, because the entry to some caves are so far away from where you actually were in the cave, it can get really confusing. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, I think the only thing that kind of prevented me from being my number one is the repetitiveness of this game. And I think if they could just make it a little bit smaller and tighter and a little faster to play, it would have been my number one. But because it's not, definitely keeps it at my number two, but we'll get into my number one very shortly.
Yeah. So we're getting to the final three. My number two, I said I had a couple different genres, but you know what? This is another platformer. There are variations of it. Metroidvania platformer. This is more your traditional, but with cool little extra stuff. It's Celeste. 2018 platformer by Maddie Makes Games / Extremely OK Games. The person has changed their development group, basically. Because it was a whole, like, well, Maddie wasn't the only one making the game, so now it's like everyone kind of is all included in it. It was an interesting little read. But it's a platformer. Its whole gist is you're a character, Madeline, who is climbing Celeste Mountain. And if it was Nintendo, Super Nintendo, that'd be it for the game, right? That's like, cool. That's a cool little way to do it.
Yeah, your objective is just to reach the end.
Yeah, exactly. You get to jump and have a dash, and then there's little bubbles kind of thing that you can hit that give you an extra dash again, and then your dash refreshes when you touch the ground. So you can grab on walls, you can climb on walls, you can jump across, all in the same dash, but you can't dash again until you actually have firm footing, which is neat because then you're going over like spike pits and platforms and things like that where you die a lot. But it's okay because it's all self-contained to the room, and each room kind of is like its own little puzzle. Then each area, as you climb up it, has a different theme to it. So your one level is just the basics. The second one goes into these balls that let you go through kind of like translucent walls and that. But when you go in, you just go straight in that direction. There's wind. There's like sickly disease things that you can't step on. So you have to figure out a way to get around those. And you can't stay on too long because when you touch the area, that's when they start sprouting. But why it's second and would have been first if the game was first, I didn't keep talking about all the time, is the story that's attached to it. It's one of those stories you can only really tell as an indie game, right? It deals with Madeline's own anxiety, self-doubt, depression, all the fun stuff.
I was going to say, I've heard it described as essentially being an allegory for her overcoming her own mountain of like mental issues. Exactly.
So you meet a couple characters along the way that are all sort of going through their own journeys at the same time, all dealing with stuff. And as you meet them as you go up the mountain, they've kind of progressed their own story.
Are they kind of on a similar journey of trying to climb the mountain?
Some of them.
Okay.
And then some of them are kind of like quote unquote lost in the mountain. But partway through, you find like her split image Badeline.
Okay, that's kind of funny.
Yeah. And that's like her personification of self-doubt. Mm-hmm. So as she's trying to scale this mountain, you have this person who sometimes just follows you or who meets you in places like, you suck, you can't do this. And then you reach the big crux of the story point where she's like, maybe I can't do this. So she starts falling from the mountain, and then you go through a whole different area. You talk to some other people, and it's like, no, I really can do this. And then you just keep climbing back up. Cool little story beats at the end. And then that's it. There's a whole bunch of extra little things that you can collect to go out of your way to do it. Very much like a Shovel Knight, where you can just go complete the whole story, but you can go get the music notes and all of those things.
This might be an oversimplification, but would you say there's a similarity between it and like, say, Super Meat Boy, but with like a story?
Yep, 100%. Meat Boys is a little quicker because you're talking about like 30-second levels maybe, other than like some of the big ones. But it's very much the same kind of thing, same kind of style. Just different ways to go about it. You have a lot more freedom in the movement because you have that dash.
Yeah, I think if we were to do like a top 10, Meat Boy would have probably made my top 10.
Yeah. It was on my long list. I think it made top 20 for sure, but
then I saw you had Celeste and I was like, I'll leave the like tricky platforming one to you.
Yeah, I cut out some of my walking sims because I was like, we got some on there. We don't need myself to talk about Firewatch or What Remains of Edith Finch or...
Oh, that's another good one.
Yes, it is.
Holy.
But we're coming out to the final ones. What do you got for number one?
My number one, which I think is not going to be a lot of people's number one, won't even crack a lot of people's top 10.
But if they know you.
But if you know me, then it's gonna make a lot of sense, and that is Stray. So this was Blue 12 Studio who made it. It's a very small team, and it was just 2022, so only like 2 years ago. Yeah. But when I saw this announced at like a state of play, and it was just a game where you're in this post-apocalyptic world, and you play as a cat, and that was already enough for me to be like, I want this game. I'm gonna play this game. Even if it's not that good, I want to experience it. But as it turns out, it's fantastic. So while you're actually down there, like you're playing as a real cat, like you can't talk and do crazy wild things a cat can't do. Instead, you interact with the citizens of this world via like a drone companion, and all the citizens are robots themselves. So You kind of progress by doing some platforming. There's some minor puzzles to solve that essentially just involve pick up an object, bring it to this point. And there are some enemies to avoid. The main one is these little like mutated bacteria things called Zerks that like jump out of the walls and like try and chase you down. And if they catch you, you have to kind of restart the area. But I think it's an absolutely perfect length. It's maybe like 6 to 8 hours on your first playthrough, but there's also a trophy for speedrunning that is beating the game in less than 2 hours, I believe, or maybe less than 4. I think 4 is right. And I enjoyed the game so much that I did something I almost never do, which is play it again immediately after beating the game. And I think just being able to play as a cat just feels good. Like you can nuzzle up to these robots' legs. You can like scratch up carpets and furniture. You can jump into like a box. Because why not? You can sleep on random things. And I think what really sells this game for me is that balance it has between this drab, dreary underground full of like all these like metallic industrial sounds, boarded up houses. But they balance that by having these very like sentimental robot characters. Like when you nuzzle up to them, their face is a screen and it'll like change to a little heart and they'll get all like, oh, this is awesome. Like this creature just wants to like be near me. Mm-hmm. They have all these bright neon lights to kind of guide you to your next objective. And you get just enough time in like the main central city to just relax and explore at your own pace before you go off to the next more like linear puzzle solving enemy filled area.
Yeah.
Like I seriously just cannot say enough good stuff about this game. When we did our top games we played in 2023, I know this was very, very close to my top. I can't even remember if it was or not. It was definitely a top 3.
I think it was 3, but I don't know.
It might have been 3. But if you like indie games, if you like sci-fi, if you like puzzle solving, if you like adventures, if you like a little mystery, suspense, narrative focused, kind of like walking simulator type games, if you like Assassin's Creed style, like climbing and jumping up, like pretty much going straight up vertical walls, if you like post-apocalyptic dystopias, or most of all, if you like cats, then you need to play this.
You say the game is perfect, or?
Yes, it is perfect.
Oh, yeah.
I had to really think if I wanted to dignify that with a response.
Hey, otherwise it would have been a catastrophe.
All right, you can do the rest on your own now.
Yeah, all right. So we got my number 1. It shouldn't come as a shock because I've only talked about this game 3 or 4 times here.
In a month.
It really feels like it. I had more notes and I was like, I've talked about it so much, I don't know if I can rehash. It's Stardew Valley, 2016 farm sim game by Concerned Dave, Eric Baroni.
You're really harvesting this one for all it's worth.
Yeah, man, farming all those.
See, who can play at that game?
Yeah. You inherit your grandfather's farm in Stardew Valley and you just farm, you fish, you go through and do some mining, you have some romance, you can build up your house, you can organize your house, you can choose which different crops you can do. It's just a fun, laze about, do whatever you like kind of game. And then if you do any of the challenges, it just destroys you.
Oh boy. And it's only made by one guy, right?
One guy, yeah.
And I would say it's probably, if not like one of the most popular games ever made by a single person.
I think so.
I think the only one I can think of that even comes close is Undertale.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly. And it hits the certain type, right? Because it's very much inspired by the Harvest Moon games. I played the Harvest Moon games. I have a couple of them for GameCube, but they never really hooked me. I'd get really into it for like 3 weeks and then that was it.
Yeah, I always find my desire to play them fizzles out before I reach like all of the objectives.
Exactly. And it was the same in Animal Crossing, right? My infamous, I'll just beat New Horizons and then figure out that I was 5 minutes away from doing so.
Mm-hmm. But to be fair, you also mentioned Stardew Valley as a game that took you a few tries to really get into.
Yeah, and I think what really did it for me because as we've said with like survival games and things like that, open-ended games I struggle with because I don't have a notion of where to end. I'm very goal-oriented.
Mm-hmm.
So what do I do if it's just a farming game sim that you can play forever? So that's where I said, you know what, I'm going to try to do as many achievements as I can in one playthrough. If I'm going to play the game and beat the game, let's experience it all at once. And I think that was what did it. I think I have like over 100 hours in it at this point, which I assumed was a lot. I have a friend who I think has quadruple that.
Wow.
They've played just a ton of it. We've done some co-op runs. It's been great. But to some people, like if that's just their game, that's their game.
Oh, and I do know people where that is pretty much like the fact it's available on so many platforms too. Yeah. Like it's like the thing they do sitting in bed for like 2 hours every night.
Yeah. I have a different friend who just does it on Switch.
Mm-hmm.
Plays most of it on Switch, just a couple hours at the end of the night. Just play that, get through that, and then just you're set, bingo, bango. But also the fact that you can do it multiplayer really helps, right? Mm-hmm. You can have everyone kind of get in. It's like I have a group that we've played it a couple times on Steam together, and that just really helps the actual replayability of it. So if you have any inclination on any type of those games, cozy games, hashtag cozy gamer, that's probably where you'd want to go.
And if you're not one of like the 50 million people that already own it.
Hey, I mean, I owned it and didn't really get into it until last year, right? So could just be sitting there.
True enough.
But that's, I think, what we've all got here for the end of that. We got top 5 indie games each. We've given y'all 15 or so, I think, to take a look at, try. If you haven't played them before, you're like, you know what? I just need one final push. These would be the ones to do, especially if you got any inkling on indie games.
Now let us know whose list you think is better, because obviously it's a competition.
Yeah, and one of them has cats and one of them's correct. So we're fine.
One of them is cats and underwater. Now, if there's any others that, based on our lists, you think really would appeal to us too, let us know.
Absolutely. But take care, good day, good night, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening.